All right, welcome to Controversial Conversations with Dr. PA. Today we are going to talk about Black educators, and we're speaking out today. So what I would like to do right now is to let you know the purpose of this panel discussion today, which is to actually, we want to take time out to address the challenges that we face in education and our views and perspectives on being Black educators in the profession right now. So we want to make sure that you all know that this presentation is for all educators, and we welcome your feedback. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section. And if you're watching this video later on, go ahead and just put #replay and any feedback that you have to comment. All right, so what I want to do now is to really dive right into it. Right now, Black educators make up about 8% of public school teachers. And again, welcome to Controversial Conversations with Dr. PA. We're going to take time out now to let our panelists introduce themselves and talk about what it is that they do. Oh, no, we're not. We're going to dive right into this. All right, so this quote is from John King Jr., and it's basically going to set our tone for what it is that we're covering today. And it says, we have strong evidence that students of color benefit from having teachers who are positive role models, as well as from the changes in classroom dynamics that result. Teachers of color often have higher expectations for students of color, are more likely to use culturally relevant teaching practices, are more likely to confront racism in their lessons, and yes, also serve as advocates. And that was from John King Jr. He's a former United States Secretary of Education. So those are all issues that we're going to tackle and talk about today in our conversation. And Bridgette Jackson, you're up. Go ahead and talk about who you are, what it is that you do, and anything that you feel is relevant about yourself today.
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. PA, for having me on. I am so excited about this conversation. Once again, my name is Bridgette Jackson, and I am the podcast host of a wonderful podcast called Teacher Talk. You can find me on Teacher Talk Community on Facebook, as well as on Instagram. And I like to talk about how education, social justice, and politics all collide. I am also the founder of Lady B Consulting, where I work with not only the educational sector, but also the public sector. I do a lot of leadership development. I train as well on how to create a work environment, a culture that is collaborative and not so much a helicopter environment, as many of us have been used to traditionally, reshaping the way that corporations and teams work together. I also have a side, like I said, I work with educators. I myself have been a math teacher for 18 years. I also at one point had owned a tutoring company. So I specialize in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the mathematics classroom. So that's where my bend is. Also, I have a background in training new educators who have 3 years or less of experience. So those are the services that I offer. You can find me on ladybconsulting.com or email me at ladybconsulting@yahoo.com. And that's a little bit about myself.
Thank you, Bridgette. And we're also going to post your information, right, at the end of this presentation in the comments on Facebook, so you guys have the information that you need to get in contact with her. Thank you. All right, Juanita, you're up. Tell us about yourself and what it is that you do.
All right, so hey everyone out there, I am Juanita McClain. I am a Buffalo Public School earth science educator. I teach 9th through 12th grade students. I am also an author. I write books within the realm of sickle cell disease. And I also am the president and CEO of our new Sickle Cell Warriors Buffalo chapter. And in our chapter, we provide services for patients and caregivers with sickle cell disease. So if you are anyone that has sickle cell disease or are a caregiver and you're interested in getting involved with what we offer, please look us up on Facebook or Instagram, the Sickle Cell Warriors of Buffalo. You can also contact me as well directly, Juanita McClain on Facebook, Juanita the author on Instagram. As a science teacher, a new science teacher in the educational field, my goal is to really learn how to connect with our kids and learn how to be a benefit to our colored students. So I believe that me being in the educational field is really a good opportunity for not only myself, but for our students as well.
All right, thank you, ladies.
Welcome.
All right, you guys ready? We're going to go ahead and dive right in. So let's get started. Statistic number 4, and throughout this presentation, you'll see a number of statistics that's focused on Black educators. Number 4 says, research has shown evidence of systematic bias and teacher expectations for African-American students and non-Black teachers were found to have lower expectations of Black students than Black teachers. All right, and here's a quote that I found that actually corresponds with that statistic, which reads, to the extent that teacher expectations affect 22 student outcomes, and this was from an actual study, the results presented in the current study provide additional support for the hiring of a more diverse and representative teaching force, as non-white teachers are underrepresented in U.S. public schools. And this actually came from the article, Who Believes in Me? The Effect of Student-Teacher Demographic Match on Teacher Expectations. So they actually did a study. And I think it involved 2 teachers, and they studied their perceptions of their students, which were basically Black students in the classroom. And then they also talked about how they need to expand on it more to do further research to come up with answers to this issue of underrepresentation. So let's go ahead and get started with the first question, which is, how important is it for students to relate to their teachers? Anybody want to get us started, and then we could just all dive in once that person is done?
Sure, so I'll just jump right in.
Okay.
I think that is really important for students to be able to relate to their teachers, because it gives them that opportunity to learn from someone who looks like them. You know, oftentimes we have students who never have a chance to have a Black educator. So to have that experience, it kind of helps them see the difference and the expectations of the teacher, as well as how things are ran in the classroom. I believe that having a relationship with your students in the classroom is the most important thing, because students, they learn so much better when they have that connection, or they can have someone that they can relate to and someone that they know cares about them and understands. So, just showing them every day in any kind of way that you care and you're there, you're there to help them succeed is what they want, what they look for.
Mm-hmm.
And I would totally have to, agree with that, because, even as a math teacher, I was the unicorn in the room because there are not many Black female math teachers in the profession. And, kids need to see a reflection of themselves. They need to see something that they can relate to, that shows them, oh, wow, I can be successful. And I see someone who looks kind of like me. They need to be able to know that they can do those types of things, and that there are many opportunities out there, to be successful outside of sports, outside of entertainment. Not that there's anything wrong with that, right, but they need to be able to see variations of what success can be and what it can look like from someone who is similar to them. And I was reading an article in EdSurge, and it was saying that Black students who have at least one Black teacher by the 3rd grade have a 13% more likely chance of enrolling in college. And if they have 2 Black teachers, that chance for enrolling in college goes up to 32%. There are many studies out there that show that they need to see diversity in the teacher pool, because going back to your question about those expectations, if there is a cultural disconnect And if people have not grown up, if there are teachers who have not been exposed to the diversity of minority culture, there will be a lack of understanding in what to expect, especially if you're relying on media, social media, biases that are constantly put out there about students of color being lazy and all other of these kind of biases, that they're not capable, that they can't do, advanced placement work, that they can't do honors level work. If they have no exposure to that culture, then expectations are going to remain low, and students perform at the level of your expectation. So it is very important to have a diversity pool in the teacher pool that is reflective of what the student body looks like.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. I agree with you. And also, when we're talking about those expectations, right? Like, it's very important to start the school year off with those high expectations. I know I try to do that as an administrator. I do that, as a teacher, to let students know, this is what I expect from you. Nothing but your best at all times. And you're right. What they do is they try to meet those expectations. They try to perform. But if you come in and you're already expecting them not to perform, and you have these low expectations placed upon them, that's exactly what it is that they're going to do. And then we turn around and say, oh, it's the students. They just don't want to learn. They just don't want to cooperate, because it's easier to place the blame. But yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So when I was thinking about this, ladies, the first thing that came to my mind is when I hear, and this really, really bothers me, educators say, well, that's not my job. I'm just here to teach, and then I go home, right? And I think of it kind of like, when you have prescription and they talk about those medicines on TV, and then at the bottom, they have those small disclaimers. And they talk about all those other things they really don't, put in front of your face when you get that medication. It's kind of like one of those things. It's like, okay, well, that's fine. But if you really want to be successful at teaching, if you really want to reach every student, this is what you need to do, right? And Juanita, you're right. Those relationships matter. So, and then this is not to say that, white teachers can't build a relationship with Black kids. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying, just like what Bridgette said, is that it needs to be more diversified, and it needs to have variations so that we can all contribute, right, to how students learn and reach those students that need that support the most.
And Dr. PA, you just said something that was so crucial, going back to relationships, as Juanita said as well, because if your attitude coming into the profession, the teaching profession, is, I'm just here to teach, I just want to go home, you're not going to survive very long, or you're not going to have the success across the board that you so wish to have, because kids know when you're being real with them. Kids know when you're being fake with them. And if they feel off the bat that you don't like them, you don't want to be around them, then they're going to give you the same in return. And the results is going to impact you as an educator, because you're not going to get the scores that you need from them, because they're not going to work for you. Kids work for who they love.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they need that connection to have the motivation to actually be able to do it. And I think that's what people miss the most. That is their actual motivation. As adults, we don't even want to come into organizations where we don't feel value, where we don't have relationships with people. We sit in our car for minutes dreading having to walk through the front door. It's the same as with kids, the same idea. Thing. And you're absolutely right. I think that too, Bridgette, that some people underestimate kids, especially students of color, because they're used to being presented with scenarios like that when they can read people. That's the very first thing that they're doing. And as soon as they understand that you really don't care, or you're not willing to put forth the effort, that's it. That's a done deal. It's like, it's no coming back from that. So it's easier to just start off, right, with the intentions of having high expectations for those students. Completely agree. All right, so let's just go ahead and put some numbers out there. We're, wondering, okay, why are we even having this presentation today? Let's go ahead and look at these numbers. So this is from 2017, 2018, and then honestly, the numbers hasn't changed that much, right? So if we take a look at the percentage of educators right now in public education, we can see that the majority are white, a little over 79%, right? And then second, you can see Black or African-American non-Hispanic teachers. We account for 6.7. I think we might be a little bit over like 7 something, but I don't think it's above 8% at this time. So if you think about those numbers and put it in perspective, right, compared to the number of students that we actually have that's attending public schools right now, is really, 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 really low. right? Which gives reason for us to actually talk about this topic, to bring awareness to, the different supports that students need in our perspective so that we can find solutions, which is what we're going to talk about towards the end of this presentation. Do any of you have any thoughts or anything that comes to your mind when you actually see these numbers? I know that when I looked at it, I knew it was extreme. I just didn't know it was that extreme. Like if we're comparing almost 80% to 7 or 8%, right? That is really, 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 really extreme.
It's kind of astounding to look at it head on, it really shows you, but the student population is literally almost the reverse.
But do you think, I just feel like, do you think it's because initially a lot of Black people, when they are growing up, they don't have maybe family members that used to be a teacher, so they don't have like that role model to look at, or someone that they looked up to, that might have inspired them to become a teacher. I don't think like a lot of Black people have that. And also when it comes to college, I feel like it really is a struggle for not just Black people, white people as well, but a lot of Black people that they don't have that inspiration or that motivation often to continue into college and fight for what they actually want. So I feel like it's a lot maybe surrounding why we don't have a lot of Black people coming into the educational field.
And I would just say also, what you're saying is correct. I mean, and if we look at education as a whole, I mean, let's be real. This is not a field that people want to go into in comparison to many other fields for many reasons. Number one is pay. What we don't value, we don't put money into. And this field is very undervalued, and you can tell from the dollar signs and how the dollar signs are moved from state to state across this nation. And when you compare us to other nations, the teacher ultimately is very disrespected among all of the professions. So, a lack of honor, a lack of trust, a lack of pay. When you compare us to other nations, teachers are revered, just like a doctor, a lawyer, a judge. Their process for entering the field is very much protected. They are paid well. It's just not the same culture here in the United States, unfortunately. And with that representation being put out there, it's not very appealing to young people as a profession to enter.
Agreed. So let's just go ahead and keep that in the back of our minds. I definitely want to touch on that when we get to the solutions part. What can we do right now to, encourage educators, or students to actually go into the profession, and especially Black people to want to go in that profession? What would that look like for them to have that type of support, and what would that support look like? So we'll get back to that, because that's something I definitely want to touch on. Let's bring up some very important points about that. Okay, so before we dive into this next question, I'm going to go ahead and talk about statistic number 3. And all of the statistics and the quotes that we speak about before we get into the question is actually supports the question that we're going to actually talk about. It's going to support our experiences. So statistic number 3, African-American students are often located in schools with less qualified teachers with lower salaries, and novice teachers. And that's from the U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights. All right. So let's go ahead and look at some statistics over here, and we can talk a little bit more about what we mean by experienced teacher, what we mean by, the lower salaries, what we mean about novice teachers. So as far as experienced teachers, Black, Latino, American Indian, Native Alaskan students attend schools with higher concentrations of first-year teachers at a higher rate, 3 to 4% than white students at 1%. So as far as salary, nearly 1 in 4 districts with 2 or more high schools reports a teacher's salary gap of more than $5,000 between high schools with the highest and the lowest Black and Latino student enrollments. And certification, nearly 7% of the nation's Black students, totaling over 500,000 students, Wow, I didn't know that either. Attend schools where 80% or fewer of teachers meet these requirements. Black students are more than 4 times as likely, and Latino students twice as likely as white students to attend these schools. So thinking about, the numbers are already low, right? But then we're thinking about the teachers that are actually there, and we're, touching on their experience, the issues with salary, because $5,000, and I'm not even sure, if that's accurate even today, but that's still high even today, a gap of $5,000 in the salary and certification requirements, being lower in those schools. What does that look like, for students attending those schools? So let's go ahead and dive right into the question. What do students of color really need that's lacking in today's public school system? And it could be any of these things that we talked about, or it could be anything outside of that. What are you ladies thinking? What do they actually need to be able to thrive in our school system today that's not there?
They need more Black teachers. They need more diversity in their school.
Mm-hmm.
They need more teachers who are certified, and more teachers who they can relate to. Everything that we mentioned, teachers who actually get paid what they're worth.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Because I feel like when it comes to the pay, sometimes that depends, that's going to affect the way a teacher, thinks about her job.
It's definitely motivation, right?
Yeah.
It's very true. It's very true. And not only that, but just the fact that you look at a lot of urban areas, and the schools that are in urban areas where you have high concentrations of minority students, they put the youngest, newest teachers in. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of times the teacher training, going back to their college education, is not a great source of preparation for what they actually face in a classroom, in an urban setting, in a public school. They're just unprepared. And when you are in your first years of teaching, even in your rawest state and with the greatest potential, you can turn into a great teacher. We all had a quote unquote rough start. I call it being baptized with fire, in my first 3 years,
Right.
And I had administrators say, you're going to be a great teacher. But we all have our learning curve in that first year. But if you are not being prepared for the real raw situations you are going to be dealing with in school, period. And not just even in public school, in private school. There's problems in every type of school and with every demographic. But if you are brand new, you often are not equipped. I remember in my first 3 years of teaching, my math department chair, she was an awesome math teacher, but her workload was overloaded. And then she was supposed to be my mentor. She simply did not have the time to give me the training, the knowledge that I needed to deal with what I was dealing with every single day. And because I was new to the district, and I was in a different state. I wasn't in New York State. I was in a different state. I was brand new. They put me with those children. And you know what I mean when they put that in quotes, those children. It was a high concentration of Black males who had failed several times. And I even had one student who was 20, about to age out the system, still in pre-algebra. Wow. So how do I deal with that situation as a brand new teacher with the mentor who already has an overloaded plate? So these young teachers, they need the guidance. If you're going to put them in the classroom with students who don't look like them, if you're going to put them in the classroom with kids who have a lot of struggles, high percentages of IEP 504, we got to equip them. And that's the problem we're facing. A lot of times our minority students are not being put with teachers who are equipped to deal with that, or given the resources or the professional development. A lot of times our PD is way off balance. It's way off balance. It has no relevance to what teachers actually need in a reality situation.
Very true. Very true. And I don't know how you guys feel about this. So, you know, in the beginning, yeah, my first year, you guys, oh my God, it was crazy. I don't even want to talk about that right now. It's horrific. But I do want to touch on, and there's no disrespect for, you know, Teach for America or anything like that, right? But one has to wonder, you know, and I appreciate everything that they do because they do offer that extra support, right? Which urban schools and schools in inner city need. But one has to really wonder why they're not placed in any suburban schools. Why are they only placed in urban and inner city schools? And why are we comfortable, right, with putting them in front of kids and having them teach, knowing that they don't have the experience that a certified teacher will have? And I've noticed that across the board, like that's okay here, but it's not okay over there. Right. And I really had to think about that. Like, okay, if there was actually a need for it, it would be across the board. So I feel like in some cases, instead of, you know, really addressing the elephant in the room, I'm going to go ahead and put that Band-Aid on it right now. And that's going to solve the situation. It's going to solve the problem. And then we're just going to let that go instead of really addressing all of the things that you two just talked about, the professional development and everything like that. And, you know, the mentoring and everything like that. But I definitely want to get back to that. I wrote that down. When we get to the solution part, we can expand on that a little bit more. So one of the questions I want to pose towards the end when we talk about solutions is, what are some of the things that just recap some of the things that we can do to help support teachers in the classroom so that they can support students of color as well? Because we know that all students don't learn from traditional ways of teaching, and that you need to be able to differentiate and build those relationships and everything else. So I want to take some time out to talk about that a little later on, because that's all really good information. All right, statistic number 7. Students of color are often concentrated in schools with fewer resources. Schools with 90% or more students of color spend $733 less per student per year than schools with 90% or more white students. And you guys know that when I thought about this in my mind, I'm already thinking, you know, I have the majority of my experience in charter schools, right? And they already get like their funding is cut. I think it's about like 1/3, or they get 1/3 of the amount that traditional public schools get. So if you think about that in charter schools and you take a look at this, when there's already, you know, lower amounts of money that's being spent per student, like that's severe. That's really severe. So one of the things I want to talk about, I'm always coming back to this, is Brown versus Board of Education. So in Brown, and then just to recap on that, that's when they decided to integrate schools. It became unlawful to have segregated schools. So in Brown, the court focused on the detrimental impact of legal separation, the fact that official segregation symbolized and reinforced the degraded status of Blacks in America. Today's racial separation in schools may not have the formal mandate of local law, but it just as surely reflects and reinforces lingering status differences between whites and non-whites by enabling a system of public education funding that shortchanges students of color. And I do want to expand on this just a little bit more, right? So when I entered the profession, I knew that, you know, there were definitely some differences in funding, but I did not really understand how those differences came about until I did a little bit more research and took some more classes where it talks about how where you live influences your quality of education. The funding that schools receive, right, is mainly based on local funds.
Yes.
It's based on local funds. And a lot of people believe that the majority comes from the federal government. That's not true. It comes from local funds. And a lot of it is being put from property taxes. So if you think about, right, your tax brackets, that really represents the types of education that's happening in those school systems, right? Which really tells us the differences between urban, suburban, and rural schools. It really makes sense, right? And I'm sure we can go on this debate over it and over and over again. People, you know, I'm for it. It's justified, this other thing, But at the end of the day, I feel like all students deserve a quality, equitable education, and their status, their, you know, amount of money that their parents make should not influence the quality of education that they receive. And I know that there is a lot of information out there that supports the fact that, you know, these schools are representative, right, of their communities, right? But also it's a system that's set up that way purposely. Like it's done intentionally. It's not done by mistake. It's done intentionally. And when I did further research, it talks about how some states have actually gone back and, you know, adjusted their funding formulas to allow for more equity in schools and different things like that, but it's a very small majority. And a lot of the funding systems that they go by today are very outdated, but because it's doing exactly what the system wants it to do, they're not in a hurry to change it, at all. And I know we see a lot of things, and when, especially now when it's time to go back to school here in New York State, I know schools in the South are already there. When we talk about how much funds that we have to spend as educators on our classroom, and I know you two saw the memes where it's talking about, classrooms funded by the teacher, classroom funded by, just the system. Completely different. And I, being able to be in a position where I can actually see the differences, like be able to go into an urban school and be able to go into suburban schools, see teachers teach in suburban schools, see teachers teach in urban schools, and know the differences. There are definitely some differences there that need to be addressed. And this is definitely not saying that it's all just coming from funding. This is just one aspect of it. Of the things that, feed into those inequitable outcomes that our students are experiencing right now with learning in urban schools and students of color. So I know I went on a rampage, but do you ladies have anything that you want to add to that as far as what you feel about the amount of money that's spent? And maybe we can talk more about it later. I'm going to add this to the list of what, how teachers can support their students and what they have, like what they're given later on.
Yes, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was just going to tell her, I totally agree with everything she said. And it definitely needs to be some changes from the way that we support each, each school itself.
Yeah, and those numbers, I'm so glad that you mentioned that statistic, because when you look at, how minority families are priced out of the communities with the higher tax brackets. So not only do the children in those communities benefit from that tax base being added onto the state formula for funding, but minority families are priced out of those neighborhoods. And unless you live in that district, in that zone, you cannot attend that school. So the system, as you said, is set up to maintain those who are receiving the highest levels of education with the most resources because they have the greatest funding versus those who don't. And I've literally taught in districts where the price points of rent, the price points of houses were all going up and they had to move. And because they had to move, you can't be in the district anymore. So wherever you're at, that's the level of education you're gonna get.
I remember working in Georgia, Bridgette, this is my first time really, understanding what you just talked about. So what would happen was every so often they would draw, like redistrict, right? And they would draw the lines differently. And so what parents would have to do is they would move anytime that redistricting happened to keep their students, to keep their kids in those quality schools. And I in my mind, I couldn't even fathom, like, what? Every time? And it happened quite a bit, and they would just get their things up and move. We're moving here now to try to keep up with the schools. So imagine how much money it would take them, to actually move, to relocate, all that other stuff, just to make sure that their kids were in a school where they could be valued and supported and the education was of quality. And it was crazy to me. But to them, it was the norm. Like that's just what they did.
And what you're saying is facts. I was teaching and I was in North Carolina in a very upper middle class neighborhood. I'll leave it there. And the school that I was teaching at, those parents had meetings with local officials to make it known that they wanted their zones redrawn.
Right.
And it was in a way that pushed the minority students to a school that was 10 miles out farther away from where the families live so that this community could, quote unquote, reclaim this school that had been most of those parents' alma maters that lived around it. If you go to that same school, the numbers and the demographics have changed. The minority population has decreased significantly. And the other school, is predominantly a minority school, because those parents knew who to talk to, had the right connections, and got the rezoning done the way they wanted it done.
Mhm. So, and this goes back to what we talked about previously before we actually went live, ladies, when I talked about, did Brown versus Education versus the Board of Education actually work? Like, did it do what it was intended to do when we decided to integrate schools? Because now it's like, I don't know how many years later, that was 1954, we're 2022, right? We're still having those issues. They're just taking on a different form. It just looks differently, but it's the same issue. And I feel like if it did what it was supposed to do, would we still have urban, suburban, and, rural schools? Wouldn't it just be schools? Mm-hmm. Right? We wouldn't have anything that differentiated one area of schools from the next area of schools. It would just be schools, period. But that's not the case today. But I digress. I promise you, ladies, I won't go into that right now. But I am going to touch on it with this slide here. And I really want to talk about what it was like for Black teachers before Brown versus Board of Education. So before Brown versus Board of Education, and you have to realize that this was before 1954. So these numbers look a little different. Then we had 80,000 Black educators in the public education system. And then after Brown versus Board of Education, nearly half of those teachers lost their jobs due to integration in schools. Okay, so what happened was, even though they moved those Black students into white schools to integrate those schools, they did not move the educators with them. And those were educators who were highly skilled, who created environments that were inclusive, who created environments where students felt safe, who were able to, go the extra mile to relate to those students. Why? Because they experienced those same things that they were experiencing on those levels. So if you think about the numbers, right, more than basically half left. And then what they were offered were positions of cafeteria workers, anything outside of the classroom that required less skills. Mm-hmm. All right. So this is an issue that, has never really been right, right? Has never really been where it's supposed to. It's almost like we were never, Black educators were never officially really included, right? But to really think about this, when I came across it, I was like, wow. And that was 1954. Right. And if we go back and think about the graph that we just saw, what was it, 6.7, something like that right now? And we know, like we talked about before, there's other factors that feed into it, as to why the numbers are so low, which we touched on as well. But that was really, for me, it was eye-opening, which is why I decided to include it in this discussion today. You guys have any comments about that before we move on? No? Okay. I think it just reinforces everything that we just talked about. But I also feel like it's important to bring up, history, because then it makes the future, what we're in right now, makes sense. It brings some light on it. All right, so this was a big one. What is the invisible tax placed on educators of color, and how does it contribute to teachers of color leaving the profession at higher rates, right? So before I looked into this, I had no idea that there was actually a name placed on this feeling. And it originally came from Black male educators and the things that they have to experience while teaching. So I'm just gonna go ahead and dive into, and this is one of those things that's like another disclaimer, like, okay, we're gonna place this on you, you're gonna have to deal with this, that they don't really talk to you about when you're hired, but then you're feeling like it is your responsibility to carry it because you're a Black educator, male or female, right? So I'm just gonna go ahead and dive into some examples. So it is, the invisible tax is also when teachers of color are seen as experts on any question of cultural diversity. When Black male teachers are seen as disciplinarians for Black boys because of the assumption that they can communicate better with them. When teachers of color have to be on high alert to prepare their students for racism outside of school. When Black educators have to work to fight against and subvert the ever-present oppression of the Black community. When Black educators are expected to teach colleagues about racism. When an uneven distribution of work is placed between Black teachers and their non-Black counterparts, which is often the reason why Black teachers leave the profession. And when schools fail at educating all students after they sideline Black educators in discussions about culturally relevant teaching, but they expect Black educators to fix it. Right. So before I get on my soapbox, I want to allow you ladies to go ahead and dive right in, because I know for me, when I saw it, I felt validated, and I felt like I was happy that somebody actually placed a name to it, because I did not understand how to communicate what it was, right? And I feel like the terms invisible tax are great, because that's exactly what it feels like. It's something extra. It's something that's invisible that we don't talk about a whole lot, but you know that it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Right, you know that is there. So any feedback that you have about the information that's presented here, or if you want to dive into your experience of what it, feels like, or, if you do feel like you have that invisible tax placed on you, or if you don't, any feedback that you ladies have in response to that.
So I definitely can agree with the invisible tax when it comes to the uneven distribution of work in a workplace, because I do often feel that Black educators are often used in several different areas, or oftentimes they're made to, their schedules are like unequal to others, so they may have more duties during the day, while others might have more prep time or common planning time, other different free period times. And so it's definitely not the distribution of the work is not equal to every educator. Everybody has different responsibilities, and I feel like everybody in the educational field in the school should, everybody should be equal. Every job should be equal. No one should have more work than the next. But we do see this often, all the time in different schools, and I've seen it more when I as a substitute teacher more than anything. We have quite a lot of Black substitute teachers, and who don't, want to go into the teacher field. They rather stay a sub, and those are the ones who mainly, they get used a lot in the school. They probably don't feel that way at the time, because they feel like it's their job. But as teachers can see it ourselves, that is unequity there for sure. So I'm gonna leave it at that.
For sure. Bridgette, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, my entire first 5 years plus, I should say, most of the time, I experienced what we call that invisible tax, because I kind of alluded to it earlier, how I was placed in a class for quote unquote those kids, and I would have white female teachers who are my colleagues literally say, "Oh, I'm glad I don't have that class. I'm glad it's you and not me." They would just, and I'm like, you're failing to realize that I'm also a person of color, and what you're saying is impacting me on many levels. Right. But the fact that and then, I had my current best friend, who's also a math educator. We had the lowest levels of performing students. All of your AP upper echelon classes were white female teachers. They were occupied by white female teachers. And so I understand at the time I didn't have the credentials that I currently have. However, it was kind of interesting. The school that I was in, the principal did a social experiment. He took all of the teachers who were in the higher order classes with the masters, the PhD, the national board certified. They switched us out. They had all of them. They had all of them come to our lower level classes and moved us up to the upper level classes. And he did it for a period of, I believe it was 1 full quarter. And the results were astounding. Those teachers had zero positive impact on our minority students. Zero impact. By the end, they were begging for their classes back. I myself experienced success in both scenarios, with less credentials, with not being nationally board certified, with less than 5 years of experience. At that time, I was only working with 2 or 3 years of experience. And that experiment spoke volumes to me. It said that credentials don't make a good teacher. So the issues that I'm dealing with, the issues that they were forced to deal with, clearly have nothing to do with a traditional pen and paper education. It's not about that. There are skill sets, there are cultural barriers that need to be overcome, crucial conversations, relationship building skills that are all necessary in order to be successful with all groups of students.
That part.
And it let me know that yes, I pursued, those credentials and certifications and whatnot, but that wasn't it. So this invisible tax that was placed on me when I was giving my classroom back, because those other teachers said, we're not doing this anymore, we'll walk off the job. Wow. Give me my AP class, give me my honors class back. I realized they weren't doing any more than I was doing. And I'm going to say it, they were doing less. They had worksheets every day. They weren't differentiating instruction, because many of those AP and honor students are self-directed learners. Yep. They don't need a teacher. You just might verify something for them, but they can get it, without you pretty much. And that invisible tax of, I got to educate you about, all Black and brown students. I have to educate you on what not to say. I have to educate you on how not to interact, because a lot of these referrals and situations and circumstances that were arising in the classroom, that teacher escalated the problem themselves. You said something that was culturally offensive. You said something that has social economic impact. You didn't think they understood what you were saying, but they understood it. And I'm not saying this to say, please, don't misconstrue what I'm saying. I am not saying that all white teachers have something against minority students. There are excellent teachers of every race and color, but because of cultural barriers, sometimes we can stick our foots in our mouth. And I remember this specific incident, I was waiting for my students in the hallway, and I was in honors. They put me in an honors wing because the way that the school was situated, they no longer had room for me to have a classroom in the main building. So there was another building on side of the main building that was the honors building. So I was the only teacher of color in that wing. And of course, all my students who were coming to me, they were mostly Hispanic, Latino, Black and brown, and so they would come down the hall. And I remember this one teacher making a comment, "Oh, here comes the club."
What?
Here comes the club. That was a very microaggressive statement. And the student bucked against that female teacher. And she demanded I write a referral. And I refused, because one, you started that. That was an inappropriate comment. You should have never said that. So I'm not going to, I did have a word with the student to say, sometimes you have to compose yourself when people say things that are not professional or appeasing. However, I'm not writing a referral. No. And to me, that was that invisible tax. It was like, you deal with them. Right. You deal with them. Exactly. And this was a prime example. And, when the principal approached me about the situation, I told him what happened. And it was dropped because that teacher instigated that situation. And so, I was dealing with racism from other teachers, because first they didn't want me in their wing because it brought all of the students of color in their wing, just to address the elephant in the room. And so there's just a lack of understanding. And sometimes people don't realize that the things they say are statements of microaggression. And that's a part of that invisible tax, because even with Black male educators who have PhDs, masters, pursue their credentials to be a principal, assistant principal, why are they always made the dean of students?
Facts. And I want to touch on that, Bridgette, really quickly, because I was just recently in a scenario where I'm not going to really get into it because they're going to know what I'm talking about. But in this scenario, there was a Black male, right? And he didn't necessarily have the title of dean, right? But what he did was he would travel from classroom to classroom to pick up those students who had behavior problems to basically give that teacher a break so that they could focus on those other students, which to me in my mind is like, wait, you know what I mean? We're not trying to find ways to make sure that these kids can stay in the classroom because now they're missing learning time. But the fact that you assigned it to a Black male that doesn't officially have that title, but that's essentially what he does. But we don't really want to talk about that conversation right now, though, right? And then when we were having a meeting, right? And he was there in that meeting. Now, he was the one person in this meeting with the child. He was the one person who was able to make a connection with this child. But he was not allowed to stay at the meeting the whole time. So let's talk about that for a minute, right? Not being accredited for what it is that you do, which is a part of this invisible tax, number one. Number two, not really being in a position where you can be open to discussing what it actually is, and not only how it impacts staff members, right? But the students as well, because you don't want to hurt people's feelings.
Right.
You know, you don't want to hurt people's feelings. You don't know how they're going to perceive it. But so I beg you all to think about this. So is it better for us to just carry it, carry the load on our own? Because that's a heavy load. We already go in a profession knowing what it is that we're, you know, what we're going to deal with. And we stay in the profession knowing what it is that we deal with because we're there for our students, right? We came in the profession to make the difference. But is it fair for Black educators to carry that load alone?
I totally not fair, you know, because the load is ours to carry.
Right.
It's ours to carry. And, you know, when you put the weight on any one particular group over the other, you are going to constantly have this back door of exiting the profession, which is what we are seeing. It is everybody's burden. And once again, there are so many educators of all races and backgrounds that really, really care about our kids.
And
about
put the work in.
Kids.
And put the work in.
And put the work in. It's really just a small few that don't. But what I think is there's just a miscommunication. There's a misstep that happens between school leadership and the teachers, the teacher pool. You know, they're not listening to what the needs are. They're not listening to what I'm telling you is actually happening in my physical classroom where I need the support. And when I tell you I need this support, I'm not just saying it to be a Debbie Downer. I'm saying it because I'm asking you for this assistance so that I can better serve our students. And I think that often is not the attitude. I feel like the attitude is those are your students. These are my students. And it tends to be a this and a that type of thing. And, you know, I've had, like I said, colleagues who have verbalized, oh, those are your kids. These are my kids. Oh, I don't teach those kids. You teach those kids. And that's not what this is. This should be a tribe. It takes the whole tribe to raise the clan. And until that point gets across, I think we're just going to be in this perpetual state of being on the rodent's wheel, just going round and round. You know, Black educators, we're not only supposed to deal with Black problems, so to speak. You know, we're here to educate everyone. We're here to accommodate everyone. And that takes everyone's effort. But once again, I often feel like that conversation falls on deaf ears. You know, in education in general, there's a lot of pressure, anxiety about who does what. And right now with this pandemic, everybody seems to be doing everything. We have administrators subbing in classrooms. We have district personnel stepping back into classrooms. There's just, right now, it's a little chaotic in education. So I think that the problems become worse now.
And I don't know how you feel about this, but I often feel as if, you know, when we talk about, you know, this invisible tax, right, and the different things that we know we're, you know, almost assigned to deal with, but not officially. On top of that, you have the fact of the matter that we often have other things that we're great at, other talents that we're not able to bring about because we're placed in this box. Because we feel like because of the color of your skin, you should be able to deal with behavior. You should be the one that talk to the parents. You should be the one that go into these classrooms where the students are disruptive and different things like that. That should be you. All the while you have all of these other talents, right, that you're great at, that you're not able to either vocalize or to pursue or to contribute to your school because you're placed in this box. And that's a pet peeve of mine. Like, don't put me in this box. I'm especially good at behavior, but I have a whole PhD in curriculum and instruction. But you don't want to talk about that though. You want me to stay over here because you're okay with me just being over here. Like, that's where I see you. That's where I need you to be. I don't want you to grow. I don't want you to expand. I need you to be right here because we can deal with everything else, but you stay over there. And I think that's another issue too with Black educators being placed in this box because people feel like that's where we need to be because I don't know, maybe that's the biggest concern at that time or the biggest problem or issue, but we want to be in a position where we can contribute as well. And it's not fair for, us to be put in situations where we want to contribute to the conversation and offer our insights, right? And our comments, but you don't want to hear it. And then when it blows up, it's like, okay, here's that invisible tax. I'm gonna need you to go fix this.
Yeah.
Now I want to hear you out. What's the problem now? And it's like, I'm already mentally tired. You can't pour from an empty cup. So on top of the demands of teaching already in the field, Bridgette, like what you talked about, right, is already burdensome. Now I got this invisible tax too. And you want me to go back to a scenario where you had the opportunity to hear me out before it became a problem. And now it's my problem and I need to fix it. But you're not trying to pay me more for it though. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just, you're just going to sign that to me because of the color of my skin. And that's my issue right there. So instead of us being open to have these conversations, right, to talk about these challenges and different things like that, to address it collectively as a group, to find solutions, putting it on people of color to carry solely is definitely not going to solve the problem.
Not going to solve the problem.
It's not working. It's not working. And I honestly don't think it ever will. And like you said, Bridgette, it's getting worse. It's definitely getting worse. All right, so piggyback on what we just talked about, statistic number 8, ladies. It says, according to the Office for Civil Rights, 1.6 million students attend school with a sworn law enforcement officer, with a sworn law enforcement officer, should be officer, but not a school counselor. In fact, the national student to counselor ratio is 491 to 1. However, the American School Counselor Association recommends a ratio of 250 to 1. So let's go back and put this in perspective, right? So race matching effect largest for Black male students, right? We already know when it comes to the school to prison pipeline, right? The majority are Black male students, right? And if we think about this and put it in perspective, like, I'm not willing to put the number of counselors that we need to help you with those challenges that you face inside of school, outside of school, but I'm going to have a law enforcement officer here when those problems come about. So taking that reactive approach instead of that proactive approach is really affecting our students. So here at the bottom, it says, what does the research say? Black male teachers make up only 2% of teachers nationwide because they're the hardest to retain. And we just talked about some issues why. Black male teachers spend more time with students outside of school than any other demographic. That's Black female teachers too. All right. Black male teachers help to mitigate the school to prison pipeline for young Black males who are disproportionately represented in prisons. And if you don't know what the school to prison pipeline is, it's basically initiated from zero tolerance, which basically says that regardless to what it is, the act that you do, you're going to get punished this way, right? Yeah. So small acts can lead to arrest in school and different things like that, which actually leads you to the possibility of going to prison in the future. All right. And we talked about that previously on one of my other conversations where we talked about, being proactive and offering those supports. But I feel like this right here, when we talk about the student to counselor ratio, what it presently is and what it should be, ladies, that's almost like half. Yeah. That's almost like half. And then 50% of male teachers who enter the profession say that they go into it because they want to teach a curriculum that affirms the identities of students of color. This is why they're going into the profession. But instead of being able to do that, especially with everything that we got going on, and Bridgette, I know you can talk about this, but the curriculum, critical race theory and all that up there right now, changing slavery to, what was it? Involuntary relocation in one of these states. It's like, okay, If this is the reason why they're going into the profession, and you place what's going on right now, especially with politics and things like that, and that invisible tax, that's why they're leaving. The percentage is already small as it is. It's already tiny. Okay, 2%, only 2%, only 2%. So that was just some information that I found, like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. And then even if you wanted to dive deeper into it, right, and think about the type of counselors. So even if it is right now 250 to 1, right, think about the counselors they actually put in these schools. Are these counselors who are willing to understand the challenges that these students face? Are these counselors who are willing to, you know, go above and beyond to help them overcome those challenges, right? That matters too, especially if there's not many of them. Do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
I just feel like, in my opinion, they really don't use counselors for what they are really there for these days. I feel like counselors more deal with say like their I lost the word that I was looking for, but more focusing on like their academic more
Really?
than the issues, you know, that they face in the classroom. I feel like, you know, security guards are more of the people who handle situations, and the kids don't often, they're not like sent to a counselor to talk about their issues or what they're going through on a daily basis or anything like that, or why they might be acting out that day. There is more of just, okay, the student's acting out, I'm going to put them in ICE, or I'm going to send them to security, you know, instead of using a counselor for what they are there for.
Right. So how they're being used, right? So not only just their abilities, Juanita, but how they're being used there. Because at the end of the day, like, you have to do what it is they tell you to do, right? In that position. So that matters.
And that makes perfect sense, because, you know, and this is an issue that I'm very passionate about when it comes to mental health, because, you know, when you're looking at the title, you know, high school counselor, that's as Juanita was saying, they're academic counselors. They make, you know, suggestions about classes the students should take or things of that nature. They may sit and listen to a student, you know, vent about a frustration, but they're not necessarily a actual school psychologist. They don't have an actual counseling background, many of them. They may have those credentials, but they don't always operate in that field. And what we need in the schools is, as they have suggested, is more school psychologists, school therapists, so that I'm not just sending, you know, if a child asks to be dismissed because they need a moment, or if they, you know, they had a conflict with another teacher. I've had students show up to my door saying, Ms. Jackson, I can't take so-and-so. I just need to sit down. I need to talk. I need to vent. They need someone with the actual skill set of the psychological aspects of that to process, work through, learn conflict resolution, learn de-escalation, all of those things that a classically trained psychologist or therapist would have to offer. And that is what's lacking in these schools, because when kids ask to leave, don't send them to the principal's office. Don't send them to the counselor who really only schedules, you know, your day. They need to talk to someone about their issues that they're going through and be equipped with coping skills of how to go back in that classroom, have a critical conversation with another student, with the teacher. That's often left to the teacher to figure all of that stuff out. And even if they leave for a second, there's also times they just send them to the nurse. Well, what can a nurse do?
Yeah.
You know, what can a nurse do? Their issues are psychological.
I oftentimes found myself in a predicament of being a psychologist, you know, and listening to students vent and, you know, trying to find solutions for them, instead of, you know, having somebody in the school who can actually handle that. So like you said, they put the students out of class, or the student doesn't want to deal with the teacher for that day. They find somebody who they can't communicate with, you know. But if they really had a counselor that was there that they can actually have that relationship with and that they can communicate, I think that they will go to them quicker than they will go to a teacher that they can relate to, so it shouldn't be placed on a teacher who that they feel like will listen and who will be there for them. It should also be someone else there that they have that relationship as well.
Mm-hmm. And all of that, lady, screams to me is that collaboration, right? Which we just talked about with that invisible act. Invisible tax. It shouldn't be just placed on one person's shoulders, right? If we have all of these people on the same page with the same goals, right, that's willing to put that work in, like what we talked about, right, then it becomes easier. It becomes easier for everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Because obviously those other situations, just sending them out the classroom and just, bringing them back in, and we're not, like what you talked about, Bridgette, discussing the situation and trying to solve the situation, and it's not going to work. It's just going to keep happening over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely important. All right. So we're getting towards the end. Faven, I'm going to try to reach out to her because I actually want to interview her. She right now is in Chicago Public School. She was awarded the Comcast Leadership Award. And she has this poem called Living with the Invisible Tax of Being a Black Educator. And this is only just one stanza from her entire poem. I actually have the information there. I'll also put it in our comments once we post this live. And I'm just going to read one of them because this is the part that radiated with me the most. And it really falls on everything that we just talked about with the invisible tax. So it says, I'm tired and invisible and angry. My reality is that I have to show up and provide more than non-Black colleagues daily. And while that's problematic enough, I'm also pressured to negotiate language to place it, white fragility and guilt. I couldn't process this with them. I couldn't ask them to analyze how race influenced the sequence of events. This creates an immense tension between maintaining safe spaces for a largely white teaching force while simultaneously pushing for change that cares for Black bodies, including my own. So we're talking about what we said before, this tax being placed on Black educators, but the effect that it has on, students of color, and also being in a position where you're required to carry all of it on your own and what it actually feels like. So I wish I could have, used the entire poem here, but like I said, I use this section right now because it actually radiated with me the most and really just went straight in with what it feels like to be put in that position. So this basically, to me, addresses that elephant in the room. It's making it known like, no, there's an elephant here and we really need to talk about it. Not to just say that it's a problem, right? But to collaborate and find solutions to it. Do you guys have any impact about, what did you feel when this was, with this stanza, or did anything stand out to you specifically?
I would definitely say the line about the white fragility and guilt. And, I on one hand, I understand, some of my colleagues have been, they overcompensate because of historically things that have occurred in this nation.
Right.
And although, thank you, for acknowledging what has happened. And there's more acknowledgement that needs to happen. But for those that do acknowledge, thank you for that. However, I often find that fragility and guilt has a negative effect on our students of color, because I've done coaching in several states. I wasn't just an educator. I also did coaching of new staff. Mm-hmm. And I found that fragility and guilt led non-minority educators to almost take it easy on students, to lighten the load, not expect as much, coddle sometimes in certain instances. And all students need to be held to a high level of accountability. We should have high expectations for all students, regardless of race, ethnicity, background. But I found that that has played out in a negative impact, unfortunately. Like I said, with the lowered expectations, the coddling, and the let me do it for you, that's not going to be productive. It's not going to help our students gain grit. It's not going to help our students to learn how to persevere through problems, whether it be a simple math problem or problems in life. It's appreciated, but not necessarily needed.
Right. I like that. Not necessarily needed, but appreciated. Thinking about that, Bridgette, I was really thinking about how when we do that, right, they're basically setting students up for failure, because that's not how society works. So
Right.
you're finding the solutions for them, you're coddling them, making situations easier in class for them to get through, because you believe that they can't actually push through it. But in reality, they're facing all of these challenges outside of school, which has made them resilient, and they're able to do it.
Yes.
And I struggle with this a lot, because I don't know if it's because they don't know how to build on those strengths that they have, or if they don't recognize that they have those strengths, or if it's just really predominantly teacher mindset.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Right.
At the end of the day, it's doing more harm than good. And then as a Black educator, when you say that, it's like, well, how could you say that? Like, how hurtful is that? You're Black yourself. How could you say something like that? Well, because I know that when they go into this outside world, it's not going to be any excuses, and they're going to have to work 10 times harder. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So why do we do that in a school setting? That's basically we're setting them up for failure in the real world. It doesn't work. Or is it a matter, Bridgette, do you think that they really just don't know how to go about doing it?
I think that's what it is. And you took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you. You know, I just think that they don't understand, you know, acknowledge, but the guilt thing, you know, we kind of have to have more crucial conversations like this to open up the floodgates of understanding between one group and another group, because, you know, that guilt or whatever, like I said, it plays out in a negative way versus I'm going to tell you what I need. Listen to your students. They tell you what they need. And the first thing they need is someone to care. That is number one. So if you do not care, and the thing with that is, you know, you may not necessarily have grown up in the environment that someone else has grown up in. And let me clear that as well. Not all minorities have grown up in poverty. Not all minorities have grown up in the struggle. It's just we've grown up differently. The cultures are different. The experiences are different. And just that difference in experience, right there is a place of opportunity to listen and learn. Listen and learn. And when you're willing to listen and learn, I believe we can move that fragility and guilt out of the way to have the real understanding we need to make those connections to move all students ahead, including minority students. But when you are unwilling or rigid about a situation and disinterested in another experience, if you have no empathy, if you have no compassion, you know, education is just, it might not be the field for you. It might not be. Because it requires it on all levels. I mean, not just with race, but, you know, with socioeconomic status, with, you know, learning ability, disability, you know, it requires empathy. And that fragility and guilt kind of gets in the way of that, where we need to really have honest dialogue.
Right. Do you, and I don't know, Juanita, either how you feel about this, but do you ladies feel like when we bring up the topic, it's almost like it's immediately taken on as like blame, right? And it's not necessarily, we're not necessarily blaming you for it, because you don't know what you don't know. But what I can blame you for is your unwillingness to talk about it, to discuss it, to work together to find solutions. And that is the actual problem. It's not recognizing that this issue is here, right? Because you're unwilling to look past your own personal feelings and how you feel about it, so that we can make a better environment for our kids. Emphasis on our kids.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right, move on. All right. So, if you could change one thing about the public education system today, what would it be and why? This is a really hard one because there's so many different things. I think that if we talk about, let's put it in a perspective of priority. So right now in education, what should be the one thing that we should be tackling? What's our biggest challenge right now in education from your perspectives?
Our biggest challenge is just recruiting educators and any kind of educators, because I feel like we're lacking. I think that's why so much chaos right now, because it's such a shortage in educator and educator field. So the most important thing is definitely recruitment, and I guess giving people a reason to want to go into the educational field.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would definitely have to agree with Juanita. The way that we recruit, I mean, really, recruitment efforts need to go straight to HBCUs. They need to go on site, even to, the opportunities that we afford our students, and particularly students of color. I think kids should be doing internships way down in middle school.
Yep.
They need to be exposed to the opportunities and possibilities. And if you never expose them and you say, hey, pick a college, pick a future in your junior year, we're setting our kids up for failure. We need to be exposing them at early ages. Kids are resilient. Kids are brilliant. Kids are scholars. Kids can do anything that adults can do. Why are we not allowing them to spread their wings and fly at an early early in their education? And I would change that. I would make it so that there are more community partnerships where, for a day, a real doctor is coming in my classroom to talk about the profession, a brain surgeon, a heart surgeon, a cancer specialist. We got Roswell Medical Campus, which is a renowned campus across the world. I want to see more of them in the classrooms talking about cancer research, AIDS, HIV research, epidemiologists coming in, people who are contact tracers to talk about COVID and how it spread, monkeypox, all of those things, and just entrepreneurs, who are in the community. What does it mean to start a business? What does it mean to properly file your taxes as an entrepreneur, have good bookkeeping skills? Why aren't our kids learning practical life applicable experiences and crafts? That's what I want to change.
Like financial literacy, right?
Absolutely.
Why is that not there? I don't understand.
And I also, like you said, I agree with Bridgette. It should happen early on, because once you get to, we have so many kids in their freshman and sophomore year, they don't have a clue what they want to do with their life, and most of them are already ruling out college. Why is that?
Right. And our numbers, Juanita, and I know you know this, are especially low with students that not only, decide to attend college, but students who actually decide to stay in college, to actually finish their programs and get those degrees. It's exceptionally low.
Yeah. And I talked to, when my students asked me, I have, my graduated senior class from last year, they wanted to know, well, Miss, I know college is going to be high, but what kind of tips can you give me? What can I look forward to? We need people to help these students know what they're, going to get themselves into, and how can we motivate them to want to continue?
Right.
So that's definitely a major factor.
Right. On the lines, ladies, when we're talking about, the classrooms, the different things like that, what we need to do, like on a large scale of things, I also believe that we need to really look back on teacher education programs, right? Because there's a lot that's lacking there. And there's a reason why a lot of teachers and a lot of educators don't stay in the profession, because they were not prepared for what it is that they're facing in schools. And then not only that, like what you talked about before, Bridgette, like the mentoring and the coaching and different things like that, that's not there either. So we have all these teachers who are getting baptized by fire. That's like, I'm not with this.
I'm not getting paid enough to deal with this.
Right. I have options. So we need to really go back. It's just one of the reasons why I do what I do, right? Because I want to be able to give those supports, and I want to be able to help recruit, and not just that, but retain teachers and support teachers in the classroom. Because at the end of the day, I feel like the people that are being affected the most are our students. right? Because they're the ones that's in these classrooms, and they're the one that's having these experiences because of all of these huge changes that need to happen that aren't, because we're still focused on traditional ways of going about educating our students, which isn't working. So how can we work together to be a part of the solution and not the problem? I have a number of things that I jotted down that we talked about. The one thing that we just talked about previously was just being open to talking about, you know, the experiences of Black educators and addressing those challenges, right? Is definitely a major first step. Also, showing students that you care, being authentic, that's what I call it, like being yourself and showing up and actually being able to, like what we talked about, do the work. Put that work in so that you don't have one person or two people of color in that school that's carrying everything. When it's a collaborative effort, that's when you get the most change. I also have, let me see, put in the work. What does that mean? And what does that collaboration look like, right? What does it mean when we actually say we're going to share the load equally?
Well, sharing the load equally is very practical. It means not allowing certain groups of teachers to refuse to teach lower level courses, to refuse to teach certain demographics. I don't believe that should ever be something that comes out of any teacher's mouth and should be made an option. Right. Everyone sharing the load looks like everyone having easy, medium, hard classes. So your lower level, your intermediate, all the way up to honors AP, those opportunities should be dispersed equally and generously, versus what is currently happening, which usually you have your teacher who just refuses, who has all the credentials, but they refuse to teach anything lower than the midstream. Right. And I think that's one practical way that administrators, I don't care if you're best friends with that teacher, they've been teaching for 30 years, I don't think that should be allowed.
Great. And then the other thing is, if we could offer any advice to those teachers in the classroom right now, those teachers who are not of color, what would that advice be for making those connections and starting to build those relationships and actually, you know, impacting their students in the classroom? What would you have to say to them? Like, where could they get started?
I think that they can get started by thinking of ways of how they can relate to the students. How can I relate to the student, every student in our classroom? Just coming up with ways to get to know each and every student, you know, and building a connection, not just with certain students, but every student in your classroom, every student that you have to teach. I would just really just tell them, always be yourself, because oftentimes we have a lot of teachers who don't know how to be themselves in the classroom. You know, they're overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed by the students that they have to teach. You know, they're not used to these kind of students, or they're not used to this kind of behavior. So now you have to equip yourself to teach any kind of student.
Yeah. And Juanita, I think that's why I struggled the most in my first couple of years of teaching, actually my first year, because then I was like, this is not working for me. But I believe that I should go by the textbook, and everything that the textbook told me I should do was, even outside of just teaching how I should behave, what I should say, that sort of thing, was like straight textbook. And it was not working. It just was not working. And when I decided, like, you know what, you're gonna get me how I am. And then that's when I understood and saw students gravitating towards me more. Because like what you said before, Bridgette, students can see when you're not being yourself, and it, you know, and they put up these walls when they see that, and it makes it more difficult for you to build those relationships when they feel that negativity. So that's when it started getting easier for me. So I definitely agree with that. Just being your authentic self and being able to show up as yourself and put the work in actually does make a huge difference. And I don't think we talk about that enough, you know, because it's something that we think is common sense, right? There's a lot of teachers out there that's like, you know, no, this is just a job. I'm going to come in, I'm going to teach X, Y, and Z. You're going to fall in line. And this is what it's going to look like. And those are the teachers that struggle.
Yes.
Those every time. I
think that I often find it a lot easier for me to get along with students and have that relationship, than my colleagues. And it's like, well, I'm just being me, I don't know how to be anything else. So when they like that, I'm just me, myself, and I come in and I treat them the same way I treat my kids at home.
That part. Right. Because when you say my kids, I really mean like my kids.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
My kids. Doesn't matter if it's 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. Oh, that's one of my kids.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Definitely.
And there's something to be said about when you embrace people who are different from you. No one is saying that you need to mimic another culture, that you need to quote unquote, be down with the group or whatever. It's just a matter of being open and embracing, and then allowing them to, embrace you and your authentic self and where you come from. Some of the greatest teachers I had, we had a lot of differences.
Right.
Our families were different. The way we grew up was different. Some of them were not minority teachers, but they were their authentic selves with me and allowed me to be my authentic self with them. And there was a mutual respect, doesn't mean I agree with everything in your life. You agree with everything in my life, but I can at least I'd be open to understanding or learning and listening.
Yeah.
And that, Bridget, just goes to show how that not only affects your classroom culture, but organizational culture, right? Like as a whole. And I feel like at some point, that's where you start. You start with staff, so staff knows how to imitate that in the classroom. And be open to that. I can think of multiple times, right, when we talk about, people that come into, urban schools and they're not prepared, but also not having the ability or not wanting to take time out to understand not just the students that they teach, but the community that they live in, and Bridget, I know you talked about this with the partnerships and everything like that, but there's a certain sense of belonging that comes with you not just understanding that student, but the background of that student, but the community that student lives in, right? And I can think of multiple times, not just even as an administrator, but as a teacher thinking, oh my God, it was a shooting last night. I hope it wasn't one of my students. And then me looking on the news to see, because now I know that when I go into school the next day, I need to be prepared, right, to tackle this. I need to be prepared to talk about this. I need to be prepared to give these students safe spaces to discuss their feelings about what's actually going on. And that is what really makes the difference.
It makes all the difference, because I've actually experienced, violence, in the community of my students. And, I had one student in particular, her cousin was murdered over the weekend. She don't want to hear about math on Monday. That's just not what she want to talk about. She needs, like you said, that safe place to release some of the tension and the anger, the frustration, the hurt. If she needs to step out and cry, I need to allow for that. That comes with being empathetic. If you lack that quality of empathy, teaching is not for you. It's not for you.
Not at all. And I just recently, when I was thinking, and I'm not in the classroom or a school building right now, but really, it's like it never leaves you. And when I heard about the situation, about what happened at Tops, I was like, oh my goodness, these educators all around this area are going to get these kids. They're going to come in. They're going to be afraid. They're going to be scared. They're going to be upset. They're going to be frustrated. They're going to be angry. And they're not going to know. And I don't know if anybody knew what to know, but especially if you don't take the time out to understand their communities, what to say to them when they come in. Like, could you imagine like how many kids came in like that? It's like, okay, what do we do? But that empathy part, right? And just being able to tell them, and them already knowing, because this was towards the end of the school year, them already knowing that you care will really make the difference in scenarios like that. Yeah. All right, let me see where we are. Give me a second, Matt. Sorry, my thing is acting up right now. Oh, here we go. Okay, I got it. Where are we? Is this where we are? Yep. All right. Here's the quote that we talked about. The schools we go to are reflections of the society that created them. And that's from Asada Shakur. And when I read this quote, I was really thinking, back to, Brown versus Board of Ed and, where we are right now in 2022. And this really just highlights the need for those changes that we discussed to actually start taking place. Because this statement is true. As much as you don't want to believe it, it's true. All right, so do we have any final thoughts or anything? And I know we're not live right now, but if you are watching this after the fact, go ahead and post any questions, concerns, or comments that you have about what we spoke about. Go ahead and add #replay at the bottom and let us know what you're thinking, and we'll definitely get back to your thoughts. We're also going to post our information. Our panelists, Bridgette and Juanita, will post their information, so you'll have what you need to get in contact with them to learn more about the services that they offer. And ladies, do we have any final thoughts that we want to put out here? Anything that we didn't, touch on that we want to leave with? No.
I think we said so much. We covered so much
ground. Yeah, I feel like we covered more than what I thought we would cover here. It's a lot of information, but I also feel, ladies, like it's a lot of good information too. And I really I guess my final thought would be to reiterate that this discussion was not just for teachers of color, it's for educators, period. Because in order for us to really start making those changes, right, we need to collaborate together to find those solutions. And it's definitely not about placing blame, but it's an issue of stating that this is a problem, right? These are the challenges that we encounter in the profession, and that we want to talk about it so that we can arrive at solutions together. Not pointing the finger or anything like that, but we need to make our voices heard so that we can start, locating some solutions, because what we want to do is we want to be able to recruit a more diversified teacher population, right? And not only that, we want to make sure that we're able to retain them and give them the supports that they need to support our students in the classroom. That's the ultimate goal. Do you ladies have any final thoughts? We're good with that? All right. All right, so we're going to end this right now. I want to thank anybody who's watching this, joining us. Oh, I stopped to share. I want to thank everybody right now for joining us. And if, like I said before, if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, go ahead and drop them in the comments below.